I was sitting thinking about the podcast this morning, taking some notes, reading a couple of research articles in this beautiful park today. And I was listening. I ended up eavesdropping, and I ended up ultimately going over and telling the people that I had been, and we had a wonderful conversation. I was positioned such that I couldn't help but overhear what these three women, a bit older than us, three women, liberals, in or outside of Portland, white women, not that it should matter, people with adult children, because I heard them talking about them, who were engaging in this very careful discussion of COVID in so many ways. One of them had been diagnosed with it and gotten a false negative first, and then come up with a false positive, but that sent everyone into some kind of disarray. Like, what are we supposed to do with this false negative when clearly this person seems to have it? To which one of the women sitting there says, I just don't think the tests are reliable, and they're not reliable in either direction. There's false negatives, there's false positives. And they're saying that they're not prepared to travel yet because, it's likely that another wave is coming. And they're vaccinated, but they're not sure, about everything that they're hearing about the vaccinations. And so one of them said, CNN is so untrustworthy. I don't trust them any more than I trust Fox at this point. So again, this is liberals. And I know a lot of people listening to us and watching us might say the opposite. Fox is becoming untrustworthy. I don't trust it any more than I trust CNN at this point. But I'm saying this, speaking to those many of us who are liberals, and those many who would say, oh, you're not, and no liberals think the way that you do. Right. This is anecdote for sure. But listening to these women talk and then talking with them a little bit before I had to leave to come back to do this, they're saying they're talking about particular politicians, and I'm just not going to name them here, and Hollywood actors and stuff, and saying they're trying to make the unvaccinated the enemy. It's horrible. Get them, they seem to be saying. And our country is in such poor shape. And with regard to the media and corporation and the politicians, each of those groups, they said they're just making shit up. This is what they said over and over again. They're just making shit up. And the path that we're on, 100% for sure, people are going to be restricted in terms of where they can go. It's terrifying. So this is one conversation, that I overheard between three women in, very liberal Portland, very liberal people, vaccinated, who were saying, this is a very big problem for our country and for democracy. And effectively, much like in a totally different domain, what I was hearing in this conversation with Camille Foster and Barry Weiss on the Honestly pod, that when the conclusion is handed to you and you are told there is no possible other thing that you could conclude, you should immediately begin to wonder what you're not being told.
So I think you're on a very important topic here, and I'm juggling a few things that seem to fit together. And this is the first time I've heard your riff on this, so I don't know where this goes. But I want to start with something some of our listeners will have heard of, and many will not, or won't know what it means, even if they've heard the term. You know what a push poll is?
I do, but yeah.
So a push poll is a poll whose purpose is not to collect information, but actually to drive belief, right? And
done by the people working on behalf of politicians. Like, under what circumstances do push polls exist?
Yeah, it's often done by workaday people who have just, signed up for a job, but they're, I think, always instituted by terrible people who are using the act of data collection as a stalking horse for another purpose. And it's hard to imagine how any decent person finds themselves engaged in that behavior.
Well, but I mean, a push poll, I wish we had an example here, because my sense is that they don't always, unless you're thinking very carefully, they don't necessarily reveal themselves.
Oh, right. No,
right?
it's right. Like any other kind of advertising, right?
Right. PR, advertising.
Cryptic. You're supposed to think it's not working on you. That's when it works on you.
Right.
But anyway, the idea is there's something that we all understand to be a legitimate exercise, which is a poll. And because it exists, you can use it for another purpose, which is actually to manipulate people's belief structures. And what you're describing, your conclusion-driven landscape, is a place where the language and form of logic and analysis is borrowed for something else. And I think this actually explains a lot of what is happening.
It's equivalent to scientism, right? In Hayek's formulation, but it's bigger than that.
Yeah, it's logicism somehow.
Analyticism.
And so here's what I think you and I are running into. You and I are trying to do an analysis of a set of evidence that is nothing if not confusing and self-contradictory, right? And, on the one hand, that's not outside of what we do on topics where there's nothing writing, right? In evolutionary biology, you're often looking at different kinds of conflicting evidence and trying to figure out what the underlying pattern is. So, that sorting through evidence and figuring out what to weight and how is an art more than a science. And if you're good at it, what it results in is predictive power. But anyway, the point is that's just a thing that we do. We are now doing it in a realm where everybody perceives a great deal at stake, and there is a lot at stake. But what that results in is a lot of people being hostile to the exercise of those tools and availing themselves of the right to borrow logic and analysis, or the trappings of them, for the purpose of manipulating. And I think almost to a person that the people that we come up against who we know, who we have had positive histories with, who are doing this, imagine that where we are is this. This is no time for analysis, right? It's like the person who wants to question authority in the middle of trying to, defeat the machine gun nest, right? This is not the time for that. This is
chain of command, people.
This is chain of command business.
Yeah.
And so the point is, look, we all understand the vaccines are good and that they are the key to going where we're going. And we all of us adults understand that it's a more complicated story than that. And this is no time to talk about downsides, trade-offs, risk, uncertainty, long-term hazards, any of those things, because the point is we either get over some threshold number, in which case things get better, or we don't. And you, by trying to deploy your analysis in the midst of this battle, are getting in the way of us crossing that threshold. Now, I will speak only for me, though I would imagine you are in the same spot. I've looked at this puzzle. There's no threshold. It's not like we're going somewhere. It's not like some policy is being deployed that explains what number we're shooting for. And if we can only get enough people on board, we will actually be able to relax. There's no conceivable way that this goes that direction.
And if we were, even if there had been a number, they're like, that's what we're shooting for 100%. It'd be like Catch-22. They just keep on upping the number of missions.
I think the thing is either they're so deluded that they think there's a number, right? And they haven't looked at the vaccines that they have at their disposal and what will happen if there's no number. Right. There's no number to hit. The vaccines are too leaky and there's too much of the globe they can't reach.
So sorry, but that's a combination of, the social landscape is such that actually there is no number, and we're certain of that. But the more important thing, of course, is the facts on the ground, the non-social landscape, the biology is such that we actually have never heard, because there does not exist a plan to end the pandemic with the extant vaccines.
Right. And so it's all done by implication. Well, there are vaccines, and vaccines could be used to end a pandemic, and there's some number that you have to hit. And those people who, aren't participating are counterproductive to that end. So it's all done through implication, but it's never stated for some reason.
Yeah.
But in any case, I think this neatly explains, I hope it's not too neat, but I think it neatly explains the experience of having people who on an ordinary day should see through the failures of our public health apparatus just as easily as we do, who seem to be completely blind to any level of failure that exists there. And the basic point is they are on a team because they believe that we are in a battle that has a coherent endpoint, and that anybody who is not, shouldering their share of the load is counterproductive, rather than, no, sorry, that battle doesn't even exist. That's not the battle we're in.
Right.
And so frankly, I guess, the other term that I think belongs in here is that this is basically a Machiavellian approach to analysis. That effectively,
that's interesting.
Because there is loosely understood to be a coherent public health endpoint, And it is imagined that the prescriptions we have been given with respect to what to do must point in that direction, that there is a sidelining of one's own self-skepticism that is resulting in a kind of certitude from people who know better than to have that kind of certitude about anything that they believe, right?
Yeah.
You know, who amongst our friends isn't good at the question of, you know, where's the weak spot in my own argument, right? These people are typically good at that, and they seem to have just lost touch with that instinct, which I take to be about a, I think, demonstrably false belief that we are on a path and that there is something useful at the end of it, and that therefore it is simply time to put it all aside and pull together. Well,
or I guess an alternative way to think about where people believe we are is that we are ascending, trying to take out a machine gun nest, that we are in the fog of war, and that there is someone, and they are telling us what needs to be done, and ignoring the chain of command here will get all of us killed. So stop it already.
Right.
And frankly, how do you create the sense of the fog of war without the fog of war? You have to get people scared. You have to get people back on their heels. You have to get people terrorized, not just by a virus, which is actually terrible and horrifying, but also terrified of each other. Mm-hmm. You have to create division between human beings, such that whenever you go out, you're looking at them going, "Oh, I'll bet you're the enemy," right?
Right. So two things. One, in this milieu, the fact that we can't seem to make the point that, hey, actually, we're not the thing that you just portrayed us as, right or wrong. We don't believe the things that have been ascribed to us. That's odd that anybody honorable would be continuing to assert these things or to believe them, unless the point was really the purpose is to get you to stop what you're doing, irrespective, true, false, whatever.
Right.
The thing you point to, though, about it's funny. The fog of war is a natural fact of the confusion of the battlefield, and it has impacts.
Yeah.
If you need the fog of war to be useful to some objective that is unstated, and I'm not claiming that that's what our friends are up to, but I do believe that somebody is polluting our environment so that we are not capable of making sense that we would otherwise make. It is the fog machine of war.
The fog machine of war.
The fog machine of war.
Oh boy, PR meets war. Yeah.
And so that is in fact what I think we are really fighting over, is whether or not this is simply a war and that fog is natural and we need to get unconfused and all pull in the same direction, or we are being fogged so that we will be confused about what is and is not on the table in terms of paths forward. So that, for example, the possibility of driving SARS-CoV-2 to extinction, which you and I are still advocating and still I hear almost nobody else talking about as even a
No, to the degree that most people say anything about it, they say, yeah, everything else maybe, but certainly not that. We're never going to accomplish it at this point.
Right. Even though it seems to be implied in the simplistic prescription that has been handed to us.
Right. What then are we
trying to achieve? Right. So, all right. Fog machine of war it is.
I like it. I mean, I hate it and I like it. Yeah.
It's a decent descriptor of a horrible phenomenon.
It's clarifying. Yes.
Yeah. All right.